Hello, it's Miss Skerman. How many videos do you think I'm going to record in this day? With this one dress and this one thing and these one glasses. Who knows? I'm talking here about your first major paper, which is a historical inquiry, and how that's going to work, and my suggestions about it. So, my idea is that in your very first paper, you have chosen a field, and I know you might change your mind a million times about what your field is, but you've just chosen a field you're going to look at for now, right? Medicine or electrical engineering or um, advertising. You've chosen a field. And this first paper is going to give you a chance to learn something about how your field got to be where it is today. Um, you will not have to argue for anything or prove anything in this paper, which makes it kind of an unusual type of paper to write, perhaps for some people. But the focus of this paper is you asking questions and then answering those questions and asking more questions. Um, so, it is in many ways. I'm looking at the assignment paper also as I'm talking. It is in many ways like the end section of a scientific paper. Particularly scientific papers are like this, where they talk about possible implications. Right. So like here's all the stuff I told you, and like here's what I think it might mean. Here's what it might mean for the future. And here's more questions I want to look at. Right. It's kind of like that idea. Presenting information, asking questions, more information, talking about what that means, and just kind of going through the organization of this paper should be super easy. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do it, but it can, and could, I should say, be super easy because you just talk through, like, I had this question and I learned this, which made me wonder about that, so I found this, and just kind of go through your process. The purpose of this paper is to encourage your curiosity about your field. I know it's hard because, like, you're not. One challenge that we always face in writing classes is that we are wanting to have students write about things that they don't know much about yet, generally speaking. But this paper, because you are probably relatively new to your field, gives you an opportunity to get some information and feel a little bit more informed about your field before we go further into the class. I particularly will encourage you here to notice what you don't know and to notice how your opinions are changing or how your knowledge base is changing. A lot of times in writing, not just for school, but a lot of times in writing, people are trying to like be defensive and show like put up a front of like I know everything, I'm right about everything, so don't even question it. That's not what you need to do here. You are welcome in this paper to and encouraged to admit what you don't know, to admit what confuses you, particularly because in this class sometimes people use the papers to build on each other. You don't have to do that. But some people in this paper will come up with some questions that they'll end up using for paper 2 and or for paper 3. So yeah, this is the moment to ask all the questions and just try to kind of make a little mess. And then going forward, hopefully, you'll be able to look back at your mess and be like, oh, okay, I see this little idea here. I'm going to turn that into a paper. I see this little idea. That becomes a paper. You will be using various sources in your writing. That's one of our overall major things we do in this course is look for sources and include information from sources. And I just think like history is important to me. And I think a lot of times people jump into working with problems without taking the time to understand why this problem exists or how this problem came to be, which I think can be often just like incredibly useful. So you should choose something to look at that you're honestly curious about. And your questions cannot be about what's happening in your field right now. That's the one parameter that will keep you on the right track as far as the assignment goes, and also keep you on the right track just looking at history, right? So no questions about what's happening right now. No questions about the future. How do I get jobs in this field? Or, how can I go about X, Y, and Z? Your questions all have to be about the past. So it's pretty wide open, but with those parameters, these parameters. First, that it has to be about the past. And secondly, that it's got to be a question with some depth that can't just be answered by Googling something, being like, oh, okay. For example, you are not going to ask, what are salaries like in my field? Does therapy help people? What does a sports therapist do? Right? If your question is something that we could ask, I guess, okay, my niece, who is in 6th grade, if we could ask her to look it up for us and then she could tell us the answer in a reasonable way, that's not a question you can ask. You also aren't going to ask those kinds of questions because they're not about your field, they're about getting a job, right? And your field, say your field is medicine, right, has many different jobs within it, lots of different things you could do within that field. So we're not to a place yet at all where we're thinking about individual little jobs or individual little stuff like that because you're not that far into it yet. Excuse me. Okay, so your questions may be things like, my examples here, when did standardized testing become important in education? I go crazy on that one, so I'm going to stop myself from saying anything more. How did the development of Space Invaders affect the video game industry? Somebody watched a Netflix documentary, didn't they? Why is Margaret Mead such an influential figure? She is someone from the past. Again, in that someone who is dead. How much does cost influence the development of the polio vaccine? Right. Again, we're not looking at now. We're not looking at coronavirus stuff. Polio, though, we're looking at the past here. Why are some nurses unionized and others aren't? Again, this is about within this question too, about the past, right? Looking to the past to answer that question and not now or the future. This is the historical paper, so you're looking at background. And then how have engineers worked internationally? Let me put a little ED on that. There you go, English teacher. How have they worked internationally? So again, in the past, my cousin, who is an engineer, has worked in Russia, trading natural gas or something. Okay, so that's what I was thinking of with how they worked internationally in the past. All that will lead you to more questions. For example, when did standardized testing become important? Then you might get to how have the ACT and the SAT been different? If you were looking at how did the development of Space Invaders affect video games, maybe your next question is how have Japanese and American designers collaborated and how have they competed? So a big part of success here is just asking more questions, answering those questions, asking more questions, answering those questions. How can you organize it? My people who like to write more narrative pieces, everyone who, when their teacher was like, let's write a story, was like, yes. They sometimes, it seems, like to write this just kind of as a story, which is fine. Say like, I was curious about X, so I looked up X, then I learned Y, and then I was wondering about Z, so I looked up Z. Just kind of tell the story of your research and your learning. Other people, often the people who, when they were told they needed to write a story, were like, oh God. Often those people want to organize what they learn chronologically, or maybe like around a couple of questions. So like, here's my first question, here's discussion of that, here's my second question, here's discussion of that. Often those people don't want to use an I or a me because they're like, oh, leave me out of it. That's fine. You can work in either of those modes for this assignment. You can do more of a storytelling thing. You can do just a very, I don't want to say impersonal, but very formal presentation of your ideas as well. Our papers go up in length. this is one thing actually I don't even decide. This is English department decision, which is that your first paper is 3 to 4 pages, double spaced, and your citations need to be in MLA style, unless you want to use another style, and then you just gotta let me know. Some people probably would like to be practicing with APA. People who are in the sciences, that is people who are not in English or art, or it doesn't matter, we'll talk about that later. But MLA is fine. Use another one if you want, just tell me. You need 3 to 5 outside sources. They should not be Wikipedia or an online encyclopedia or an online dictionary. However, I love to use Wikipedia to go down to the sources at the bottom, click on those, and get to information that I'm looking for. That's a great resource, I think. So 3 to 5 outside sources. Sometimes people use, another little reminder I gave there, sometimes people just use their questions to connect them from paragraph to paragraph. I learned this. This made me wonder this. New paragraph. It doesn't have to be a fancy kind of organization, but it could be. Tiny formatting reminders. Remember to put in page numbers. I just like to give people the heads up about things that like irrationally like put me in a frown. Put some page numbers on, because although I try very hard to be, not bring any of my own personal preferences to this, when people don't put page numbers, I tend to be like, I don't know, it's fun to put the page numbers on, isn't it? Also, double check the spacing in your works cited. There's weird spacing that happens with works cited, and what you're doing there, honestly, is showing that you know how to do it, and that you've paid attention, and that you've tried to do it right. And that makes people who read your work, including myself, be like, oh, this person probably knows what he, she, they are talking about. Okay. I think I have covered pretty much everything as far as how this paper gets put together. Your rough drafts are due February 18th, and your copies for the first evaluation are due February 22nd. You will have the opportunity to revise this paper, and that's a whole other discussion. There'll be a sequence of things you need to do when you revise so that I can understand what you did. But we'll get to that, obviously, when you get your paper back. Let me know if you have more questions. I could go through the rubric, but you can look at that on your own, I think. Where's the button to end this video? There it is.